Theodore here, and tonight we are diving headfirst into a storm that refuses to settle. A controversy layered with accusation, denial, public perception, power, and the relentless machinery of celebrity culture that never truly sleeps. Because what we are witnessing right now is not just another fleeting scandal, but a full-scale collision between reputation and suspicion, between narrative control and public doubt. And at the center of it all stands Jay-Z, one of the most powerful figures in modern entertainment, a man whose legacy has been built over decades, yet now finds itself under intense scrutiny in ways that no carefully curated image can fully contain. Because when allegations of this magnitude enter the conversation, they do not simply disappear, even if lawsuits are dropped, even if statements are issued, even if legal outcomes lean in one direction or another. The court of public opinion operates on an entirely different timeline and a completely different standard, and that is exactly where things begin to unravel. Because the moment accusations surfaced involving a minor, regardless of their legal resolution, the damage to perception was immediate and deeply rooted. And what followed only added fuel to a fire that refuses to go out, with references to connections, associations, past relationships, and the broader network of powerful figures surrounding him, all being pulled into the spotlight, whether fairly or not. Because in moments like this, proximity becomes its own form of evidence in the eyes of the public, and that is something no publicist can easily undo. Now, Jay-Z's response, particularly through his interview, paints a picture of a man who feels wronged, who describes anger, heartbreak, and a sense that he has been targeted unfairly. And in his own words, he frames the allegations as not just false, but as something deeply damaging, something that struck at his core, his family, his identity, and his moral code. And yet, even as he speaks, there is an undercurrent that many are picking up on, a tension between his narrative and the broader context surrounding him. Because when he references rules from his past, when he speaks about lines that were not to be crossed, it raises as many questions as it attempts to answer. And for a public already skeptical, that kind of language does not necessarily reassure. It complicates. It creates space for interpretation. And in a situation like this, ambiguity can be just as damaging as accusation. Now let's address the legal side clearly, because facts matter. The lawsuit in question was ultimately dropped. The accuser amended their claims. Inconsistencies were cited, and Jay-Z has taken the additional step of filing a defamation lawsuit in response, positioning himself not just as someone defending his name, but as someone actively pushing back against what he calls an attempt at extortion. And in the legal arena, that is significant, because it shifts the dynamic from defense to offense, from reaction to assertion. But here is where things become complicated again, because while a dropped case may signal a lack of sufficient evidence to proceed, it does not automatically erase public suspicion, especially in a climate where people are increasingly aware of how complex, fragile, and pressured such cases can be. And so, even as one narrative closes, another continues to grow in the public imagination. And that brings us to one of the most talked about elements in this entire situation, the involvement or perceived involvement of Tina Knowles. Because when a figure so closely tied to both Jay-Z and Beyoncé appears to engage, even subtly, with content related to these allegations, it sends shockwaves through an already volatile conversation. The act of liking a post, something that in isolation might seem trivial, suddenly becomes a symbolic gesture loaded with implication. And her explanation that her account was hacked has only deepened the divide in public reaction. Because while hacking is certainly possible, many are questioning the plausibility of such a specific action being the result of a breach rather than intent. And this is where perception begins to override explanation, because in the digital age, people are not just consuming information, they are interpreting behavior, reading between the lines, constructing narratives from patterns. And when Tina Knowles reportedly unfollowed Jay-Z, that added another layer to the speculation, because social media actions, however small, carry enormous weight in a culture that treats them as signals, as indicators of alignment or distance. And so the question becomes not just what happened, but what it means, and whether it reflects something deeper within the family dynamic, something that the public is not fully privy to, but is eager to decode. Now, beyond the immediate controversy, there is a broader web of associations being pulled into the conversation, references to past connections with figures like Diddy, mentions of other high-profile individuals, even resurfaced claims and rumors that stretch back years. And this is where the situation becomes less about a single allegation and more about a pattern, or at least the perception of one. Because when multiple narratives begin to overlap, even loosely, they create a cumulative effect that is difficult to ignore. And for someone in Jay-Z's position, that is particularly dangerous, because his influence, his wealth, and his status make him both a target and a focal point, someone whose every move is scrutinized, not just for what it is, but for what it might represent. Now let's talk about the timing of everything, because timing in situations like this is never neutral. The announcement of major concerts, the celebration of album anniversaries, the re-emergence into the public spotlight through performances and appearances, all of it is being interpreted through the lens of reputation management. And whether that interpretation is fair or not, it is undeniably present, because audiences today are more skeptical than ever. They are aware of how narratives can be shaped, how distractions can be deployed, how attention can be redirected. And so what might have once been seen as a simple career move is now being viewed as a strategic decision, a calculated effort to shift the conversation, to replace controversy with nostalgia, to remind people of legacy rather than allegation. And yet, even here, the response is divided, because while some see it as an attempt to move forward, others see it as avoidance, as deflection, as an unwillingness to fully confront the weight of what has been said. And then there is the question of public support, because despite everything, despite the headlines, the speculation, the debate, the demand for tickets to his shows has been massive, overwhelming even, with reports of hundreds of thousands, even millions waiting in line. And that raises a critical question about the nature of accountability in the entertainment industry. Because if the public continues to support, continues to engage, continues to show up, what does that mean for the impact of these controversies? Does it suggest that the divide between online outrage and real-world behavior is wider than we think? Does it reveal a disconnect between what people say and what they do? Or does it simply highlight the enduring power of celebrity, the ability of certain figures to withstand storms that would completely dismantle others? And this is where the conversation becomes less about Jay-Z as an individual and more about the system as a whole. Because time and time again we see similar patterns. Allegations emerge, public reaction intensifies, statements are issued, legal battles unfold, and eventually, in many cases, the cycle resets. Careers continue, audiences return, and the narrative shifts once again. And that does not necessarily mean that nothing happened, but it does raise questions about what it takes for accountability to truly take hold. Now let's not ignore the emotional dimension of this situation, because beyond the headlines and the analysis, there are real people involved, families, children, relationships that are inevitably affected by the weight of these allegations. And Jay-Z himself has spoken about the impact on his children, the difficulty of navigating such serious accusations in a way that shields them while also confronting the reality of the situation. And regardless of where one stands on the broader issue, that aspect cannot be dismissed lightly, because the intersection of public controversy and private life is one of the most challenging spaces anyone can navigate. And for someone constantly in the spotlight, that challenge is amplified exponentially. Now, as we bring all of this together, what we are left with is not a simple story with a clear resolution, but a complex, evolving situation that continues to unfold in real time, a situation where facts, perceptions, narratives, and emotions are all intertwined in ways that make definitive conclusions difficult, if not impossible, at this stage. And so the real question moving forward is not just what is true or false, but how this will ultimately shape the legacy of one of the most influential figures in modern music. Whether this moment will fade into the background, as so many others have, or whether it will leave a lasting mark that cannot be erased. And as always, the answer will not come from a single interview, a single statement, or a single event, but from the ongoing interplay between public perception, media coverage, legal developments, and the choices made by those at the center of it all. Because in a world where image is everything and truth is often contested, the line between survival and downfall is thinner than ever. And tonight, that line is exactly where this story stands.